The first time I saw the blinking light, I thought I was imagining things. It was 3:42 in the morning, and I was standing on my back porch in my bare feet, holding a cold cup of coffee that had gone lukewarm an hour earlier. I don't sleep much anymore, not since Martha passed. The silo stands about 80 yards from the house, a tall concrete cylinder that hasn't held grain in 15 years. My father built it in 1972, back when this property was still a working farm. Now it's just me, the silo, the old workshop, and 47 acres of land that the HOA has been trying to absorb into their tidy little subdivision for the better part of a decade. The blinking light was small, red, steady. It pulsed once every 3 seconds, barely visible through the rusted vent near the top of the silo. I set my coffee down on the porch railing and squinted into the dark. The light blinked again. I counted the seconds. 1, 2, 3, blink. 1, 2, 3, blink. That's not a reflection. That's not a firefly. That's electronic. I pulled on my boots, grabbed my flashlight from the hook by the door, and walked out into the cold November air. The grass was wet. The silo door was still padlocked with my lock. The same heavy-duty master lock I'd put on there in 2018, when the HOA first started making noise about shared community infrastructure. But when I got closer, I noticed something that made my stomach tighten. There was a second lock on the access panel near the base. A smaller lock, silver, brand new, not mine. I stood there in the dark, flashlight beam fixed on that little silver lock, and I felt the old familiar anger start to coil in my chest. Someone had been inside my silo. Someone had installed equipment. And I had a pretty good idea who was responsible. Her name was Karen Whitmore. She was the president of the Oak Haven Estates Homeowners Association, and she had been trying to get her hands on my property since the day I refused to sell. Before I explain what happened next, tell me where you're watching from. I'm always curious who's out there in the dark with me. I didn't cut the lock that night. I wanted to. Believe me, I wanted to take my bolt cutters and snap that little silver lock right off and see what was inside. But I've been an electrician for 38 years. I know how systems work. I know how people work. And I knew that if I broke that lock without documentation, Karen Whitmore would find a way to spin it against me. She'd call the sheriff. She'd claim I vandalized HOA property. She'd file another one of her famous complaints. So instead, I took out my phone and I took pictures. I photographed the silver lock from 3 angles. I photographed the access panel. I photographed the blinking red light through the vent. I photographed my own padlock still intact on the main door. Then I went back inside, made a fresh pot of coffee, and sat down at my kitchen table to think. The thing about Karen Whitmore is that she's not stupid. She's arrogant, entitled, and careless with the truth. But she's not stupid. She's the kind of person who mistakes confidence for competence. She drives a white Mercedes G-Wagon through the subdivision like she's surveying her kingdom. She carries a clipboard everywhere, even to the grocery store. She speaks in polished, rehearsed sentences that sound reasonable until you actually examine what she's saying. And she's been president of the Oak Haven Estates HOA for 6 years, long enough to build a small empire of fear and compliance among the 312 homes in the subdivision. My property sits on the eastern edge of the development. When the original developer carved up the old farmland in 2005, he left my 47 acres alone because my father refused to sell. The deed predates the HOA by 33 years. The property is not part of the association. Never has been. Never will be. But Karen Whitmore has never accepted that. She's tried to fine me for unmaintained structures. She's tried to cite me for visual nuisance because of the silo. She's tried to claim that my access road is a community thoroughfare because the school bus used to turn around there. Every single time, I've sent her a certified letter with the relevant county records, and every single time, she's backed down for a few months before finding a new angle. But this was different. This wasn't a letter, or a fine, or a passive-aggressive note taped to my gate. This was physical equipment installed inside my private structure. This was trespassing. This was something I could document. The next morning, I called my former apprentice, a young man named David Okonkwo, who now runs his own electrical contracting business in the next county. David worked with me for 7 years before he got his master's license. He's sharp, methodical, and he knows my property almost as well as I do. David, I said, I need you to come out to the farm and take a look at something. What kind of something? The kind that blinks. He arrived at 9:15 a.m. with his tool bag and a thermal camera. I showed him the silver lock. I showed him the blinking light. I showed him the photographs I'd taken the night before. David studied the access panel for a long moment, then looked at me with an expression I recognized. It was the same expression he used to get when we'd open up a junction box and find someone else's sloppy work. "This is a wireless bridge," he said. "Commercial grade. Probably Ubiquiti or Cambium. The blinking light is a status indicator. It's transmitting. Transmitting what? Data. Video feeds, most likely. This kind of equipment is used for point-to-point surveillance networks. You've got a receiver up there, probably an antenna array, and it's bouncing signal to somewhere else." I felt my jaw tighten. "She put cameras in my silo." "Not just cameras," David said. "If this is what I think it is, she's using your silo as a relay point. The height makes it perfect for line-of-sight transmission. She could be running the entire HOA security system through this." I asked David to document everything. He spent 2 hours photographing, measuring, and writing notes. He identified the make and model of the wireless bridge through the vent without cutting the lock. He traced the power source to a buried cable that ran from the silo toward the subdivision's maintenance shed. He found a second antenna mounted inside the silo's upper chamber, visible only through a small gap in the concrete. And he found something else, a small weatherproof box attached to the interior wall, just visible through the access panel gap. On the side of the box was a printed label. "Property of Oakhaven Estates HOA, Security System Node 3, installed 03/14/2024, March 14th. That was 8 months ago. They'd been in my silo for 8 months. I didn't call Karen Whitmore right away. I didn't send an email. I didn't file a police report. I sat down at my kitchen table with a fresh legal pad, and I started writing down everything I knew. I wrote down the date I first noticed the blinking light. I wrote down the make and model of the equipment David identified. I wrote down the installation date on the label. I wrote down the location of the buried power cable. I wrote down the fact that my lock was still intact, which meant someone had either picked it or used a key I didn't know existed. Then I called the county recorder's office and requested a copy of every document related to my parcel and the adjacent HOA parcels. I requested easements, utility agreements, maintenance contracts, and recorded covenants. I requested everything. The clerk, a patient woman named Mrs. Delgado, who had helped me with previous HOA disputes, promised to have the files ready by the end of the week. While I waited, I did something I'd been putting off for years. I walked the entire perimeter of my property with a survey map and a can of orange marking paint. It took me 2 days. I found 3 places where the HOA had encroached: a drainage culvert they'd extended onto my land, a section of decorative fencing that crossed the property line by 12 feet, and the buried power cable David had found, which ran from the HOA maintenance shed, across the county drainage easement, and directly into the base of my silo. I marked every encroachment with orange paint and photographed every single one. On Thursday morning, I drove to the county recorder's office and picked up the files. Mrs. Delgado had done thorough work. She'd included the original 1972 deed for my property, the 2005 plat map for Oakhaven Estates, every recorded easement in the area, and the HOA's full covenant document. I sat in my truck in the county parking lot and read through every page, and that's when I found it. The HOA's covenant document included a section on common area utilities. It listed the maintenance shed, the clubhouse, the pool pump house, the gate control box, and the irrigation system. It did not list my silo. It did not list any structure on my property. It did not include any easement, utility agreement, or access right related to my parcel. There was no recorded document anywhere that gave the HOA permission to install equipment on my land. Karen Whitmore had built her entire security network on a foundation of absolutely nothing. I made copies of everything. I organized the documents into a folder with labeled tabs. I wrote a summary of my findings. I included David's photographs and technical notes. I included my own photographs of the encroachments. I included the county records that proved the HOA had no legal right to use my silo. Then I waited. I didn't have to wait long. 3 days later, on a Sunday afternoon, I was in my workshop rebuilding a vintage table saw when I heard tires on gravel. I looked out the window and saw the white Mercedes G-Wagon pulling up to my gate. Karen Whitmore stepped out in a cream-colored blazer and dark sunglasses, clipboard in hand. Behind her was a white van with a magnetic sign on the side that read, "Precision Security Solutions, Commercial and Residential." A young man in a polo shirt got out of the van and started unloading equipment. I walked out to meet them. Mr. Chen, Karen said, using my name like she was doing me a favor by remembering it. We're here to perform routine maintenance on the security node. This shouldn't take more than an hour. I stopped about 10 feet from her. What security node? The one in the silo. It's part of the community security system. The board approved it last February. My silo. She smiled. It was the kind of smile that was supposed to make me feel unreasonable. The silo is the perfect community signal point. The height gives us coverage across the entire subdivision. The board has utility rights under the common area provisions. Show me the document. Excuse me? Show me the recorded document that gives you the right to install equipment in my private structure. Her smile tightened. I don't have it with me. It's in the board files. Then you can come back when you do. The security installer was standing by his van, holding a tool case, looking uncomfortable. I turned to him. What's your name, son? Marcus. Marcus Webb. Marcus? Did you install the equipment in this silo back in March? He glanced at Karen, then back at me. Yes, sir. I did the Node 3 installation. Who authorized it? Mrs. Whitmore signed the work order. She said the silo was HOA-controlled utility infrastructure. I nodded slowly. Marcus, do you have a copy of that work order? In the van? I'd like to see it. Karen stepped forward. This is ridiculous. Marcus, you don't need to show him anything. This is HOA business. Karen, I said, and my voice was very calm. You are standing on my property. You are attempting to access my private structure. You have installed equipment in that structure without my permission. You have buried a power cable across my land without an easement. You have been doing this for 8 months. Now, I am going to ask you one more time. Show me the document that gives you the right to do any of this. Her face went through several expressions. Annoyance, calculation, then something that looked almost like uncertainty. The board has implied utility rights, she said. Under the common area provisions. Implied rights are not recorded easements. You know that, I know that, and I'm pretty sure the county knows that. I turned back to Marcus. The work order, please. Marcus looked at Karen again. She didn't say anything. He walked to his van and came back with a clipboard. On it was a printed work order from Precision Security Solutions. The job description read, Install wireless bridge and antenna array at HOA Node 3 location. Customer-provided structure. Grain silo. Structure classification. HOA-controlled utility structure. At the bottom was a signature line. Karen Whitmore's signature was there, dated February 28, 2024. Below it was a printed note. Customer confirms ownership and/or legal right to use structure for installation. Precision Security Solutions not responsible for verifying property rights. I took a picture of the work order with my phone. Then I handed it back to Marcus. Thank you, Marcus. You might want to call your boss. This installation is about to become a legal problem, and your company's name is on the paperwork. Marcus's face went pale. What do you mean? I mean that Karen Whitmore does not own this silo. She does not have an easement. She does not have permission. She signed your work order, claiming she had the right to use this structure, and that claim is false. Your company installed equipment on private property without the owner's consent. That's trespassing. That's conversion. That's a lawsuit waiting to happen. Karen's composure cracked. You're being dramatic. The board will sort this out. The board, I said, is about to find out that their president exposed them to significant legal liability. You signed a document claiming ownership of my property. You buried a power cable across my land. You installed surveillance equipment in my silo. And you did all of it without a single recorded document to back you up. I pulled out my phone and showed her the photograph I'd taken of the county records. This is the HOA covenant. It lists every piece of property the HOA controls. My silo is not on it. This is the county plat map. It shows my property line. The silo is inside my boundary. This is the easement record. There is no utility easement on my land. You have nothing, Karen. You've been operating on nothing for 8 months. She stared at the phone screen. Her mouth opened and closed. For the first time in 6 years, Karen Whitmore had nothing to say. Now, I said, you're going to do 3 things. First, you're going to tell Marcus to pack up his equipment and leave my property. Second, you're going to call an emergency board meeting. Third, you're going to explain to the board why the HOA is about to be sued for trespassing, conversion, and unauthorized surveillance. And if you don't do those 3 things, I will file a police report this afternoon and let the sheriff sort it out. Karen Whitmore stood there in her cream-colored blazer, clipboard dangling at her side. and I watched the realization settle into her face. She had made a mistake, a big one, and she had put it in writing. The board meeting was scheduled for Wednesday evening at the clubhouse. I spent the intervening days preparing. I made copies of every document. I organized them into a presentation folder with labeled tabs. I wrote a timeline of events. I printed photographs of the equipment, the buried cable, the encroachments. I included the work order with Karen's signature. I included the county records showing no easement. I included a letter from David Okonkwo describing the technical specifications of the equipment and confirming that it had been installed without my knowledge or consent. On Tuesday afternoon, I received an unexpected phone call. It was the owner of Precision Security Solutions, a man named Robert Chen. No relation to me, despite the shared surname. "Mr. Chen," he said, "I understand there's been a situation with one of our installations." "There has. I've spoken with Marcus. I've reviewed the work order. I want you to know that we were told the silo was HOA property. Mrs. Whitmore was very specific about that. I believe you, but your company still installed equipment on private property without verifying ownership. Your work order has a liability disclaimer, but that doesn't protect you from a lawsuit." Robert Chen was quiet for a moment. "What do you want?" "I want the equipment removed. I want the power cable dug up. I want a written admission from your company that the installation was unauthorized. And I want you to attend the board meeting tomorrow night and explain to the HOA why their security system is about to be dismantled." "I can do that." "Good, because if you don't, my attorney will be in touch." I didn't actually have an attorney yet, but Robert Chen didn't need to know that. The board meeting was held in the clubhouse at 7 p.m. The room was packed. Word had spread through the subdivision that something was happening, and the residents had turned out in force. There were maybe 80 people in the room, plus the 5 board members sitting at the front table. Karen Whitmore was at the center, looking significantly less polished than usual. Her blazer was wrinkled, her hair was slightly out of place. She kept glancing at the door like she was hoping for a rescue that wasn't coming. I arrived at 6:55 p.m. with my presentation folder under my arm. Robert Chen was already there, sitting in the back row with Marcus. David Okonkwo was with me, carrying a laptop and a small projector. I'd asked him to come as a technical expert. The board treasurer, a nervous man named Harold Simmons, called the meeting to order. He looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. "We have an emergency agenda item tonight," Harold said. "It concerns the community security system and a property dispute with Mr. James Chen." Karen stood up. "I'd like to address this first. The board acted in good faith. The silo was identified as an optimal signal point, and we believed we had the right to use it under the common area provisions. I didn't say anything. I just opened my folder and waited. The installation was approved by a majority vote," Karen continued. "The equipment has been functioning perfectly for 8 months. The community has benefited from improved security coverage. Mr. Chen is overreacting to a minor procedural issue." I stood up. "May I address the board?" Harold nodded. I walked to the front of the room and set my folder on the table. "I'm going to show you some documents," I said. "I'll keep it simple." I pulled out the first document. This is the original deed to my property, recorded in 1972. It shows that I own 47 acres, including the grain silo. The deed predates the HOA by 33 years. I pulled out the second document. This is the Oak Haven Estates Covenant, recorded in 2005. It lists every piece of property the HOA controls. The silo is not on this list. I pulled out the third document. This is the county easement record. There is no utility easement on my property. There is no access agreement. There is no recorded document of any kind that gives the HOA the right to use my silo. I pulled out the fourth document. This is the work order from Precision Security Solutions, signed by Karen Whitmore on February 28, 2024. It describes the silo as an HOA-controlled utility structure. That description is false. Mrs. Whitmore signed a document claiming ownership of property she does not own. The room was very quiet. I pulled out the fifth document. This is a technical assessment from David Okonkwo, a licensed master electrician. It describes the equipment installed in my silo: a wireless bridge, an antenna array, and a power cable buried across my land. The total value of the equipment is approximately $4,200. The installation was performed without my knowledge or consent. I pulled out the sixth document. This is a letter from Robert Chen, the owner of Precision Security Solutions. He confirms that his company was told the silo was HOA property, and that they would not have performed the installation if they had known otherwise. I looked at the board. Here's what this means. The HOA trespassed on my property. The HOA installed surveillance equipment in my private structure. The HOA buried a power cable across my land without an easement. The HOA president signed a document falsely claiming ownership of my property. And the HOA has been operating this illegal installation for 8 months. I turned to face the residents. You've all been paying for a security system that's partially built on stolen property. Your HOA dues have been funding an installation that violates county property law. And if I decide to file a lawsuit, the HOA will be liable for damages, legal fees, and the cost of removing the equipment. A murmur went through the crowd. Karen's face was pale. This is an exaggeration, she said. The board can resolve this. How? I asked. By retroactively creating an easement? You can't. Easements have to be recorded. By claiming you didn't know. The work order proves you did. By blaming the contractor, Robert Chen is sitting right there, and he has a signed document from you claiming ownership. Karen looked at Robert Chen. He didn't meet her eyes. The security contract is void, Robert said quietly. Precision Security Solutions will be removing the equipment at our own expense. We will not be doing further business with Oakhaven Estates HOA. The room erupted. Residents started shouting questions. Harold Simmons was trying to restore order. Karen Whitmore was standing frozen at the front table, her clipboard clutched against her chest like a shield. I waited for the noise to die down. When it did, I spoke again. I'm not here to destroy the HOA. I'm here to protect my property. Here's what I want. First, all equipment removed from my silo within 7 days. Second, the power cable dug up and my land restored. Third, a written admission from the board that the installation was unauthorized. Fourth, a public correction at the next HOA meeting, explaining that the silo is private property. And fifth, Karen Whitmore's resignation as board president. Karen's head snapped up. You can't demand that. I'm not demanding it. I'm offering it as an alternative to a lawsuit. If you resign, I won't sue the HOA for trespassing, conversion, and unauthorized surveillance. If you don't resign, I will file the lawsuit tomorrow morning, and I will name you personally as a defendant. The room went silent again. Harold Simmons cleared his throat. Mrs. Whitmore, I think the board needs to discuss this in executive session. There's nothing to discuss, Karen said. I won't be bullied into resigning. Then I'll see you in court, I said. I closed my folder and walked toward the door. I was halfway across the room when a voice called out, "Wait!" It was Harold Simmons. He was holding a piece of paper. Mrs. Whitmore, I have a motion from the board. We're calling for a vote of no confidence. If it passes, you'll be removed as president, effective immediately. Karen stared at him. You can't do that. We can. The bylaws allow it, and based on what we've heard tonight, I think the vote will pass. The vote took 10 minutes. It passed 4-1. Karen Whitmore was removed as president of the Oakhaven Estates HOA. She walked out of the clubhouse without saying another word. Her white Mercedes peeled out of the parking lot, and I never saw her on my property again. The cleanup took about 3 weeks. Precision Security Solutions removed the equipment from my silo. They dug up the power cable and restored the ground. They sent me a formal letter of apology and a check for $1,500 to cover my inconvenience. The HOA held an emergency election and installed a new president, a retired schoolteacher named Patricia Okonkwo. No relation to David, but she turned out to be his aunt, which was a small world coincidence that made me smile. Patricia called me the week after the election. Mr. Chen, I want to apologize on behalf of the association. What happened was unacceptable. We're reviewing all of our policies to make sure nothing like this ever happens again. I appreciate that. We'd also like to discuss a formal boundary agreement. Something recorded with the county. Clear lines, no more confusion. I'd like that. We met the following week with a surveyor. We walked the property line together. We marked the boundaries with new stakes. We drafted an agreement that recognized my ownership and established clear limits on HOA access. The agreement was recorded with the county on December 12th. The silo is quiet now. No blinking lights, no hidden equipment, no buried cables. I go out there sometimes in the early morning when the sun is just coming up over the trees, and I stand in the shadow of that old concrete tower. My father built it with his own hands. He poured the foundation in the summer of 1972, when I was 12 years old. I remember holding the level while he checked the forms. I remember the smell of wet concrete and the sound of his voice telling me that this land would be mine someday. Martha loved the silo. She used to say it looked like a castle tower from one of those old storybooks. She'd sit on the porch in the evenings and watch the sunset painted gold. After she passed, I couldn't look at it for almost a year. Every time I saw it, I saw her empty chair on the porch. But now, when I look at it, I see something else. I see a boundary that held. I see a line that couldn't be crossed. I see a piece of paper that was stronger than a clipboard. Some people think authority comes from being loud. Karen Whitmore was loud for 6 years. She had the clipboard, the Mercedes, the polished smile, the board votes, the contractor invoices, the whole performance of power. But when it came down to it, she didn't have a single recorded document. She had nothing but noise. I had the deed. I had the survey. I had the county records. I had the work order with her signature on it. I had the invoice that betrayed her. And in the end, that was enough. The loudest person in the room is not always the one with the rights. Sometimes the quietest person is the one holding the folder. I finished my coffee and walked back toward the house. The sun was up now, full morning light spreading across the fields. The silo stood behind me, solid and silent, exactly where it had always been, exactly where it would always be. My father's land, my wife's favorite view, my name on the deed, and not a single blinking light in sight.